young children have a tendency to eat what they like, regardless of its nutritional value. We squander voluminous hours watching television or reading material that provides little or no spiritual nutrition. In Matthew chapter 20, when James and John tried to use their mother to get some special positions in the kingdom for them.
This is Stephen Lett, one of the leaders of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And you may be wondering,
oh my God, what's wrong with your face?
There has been a number of theories saying why his face moves like that, from a physical impediment to him being trained by deaf people. Everyone seems to have a theory on his face and why it moves the way it does. So today, we'll take a break from doctrine and triggering dramas to conclusively answer the question, what is wrong with Stephen Lett's face? The first thing I heard when I first noticed Stephen Lett is that he has a deaf mother, or that he was in a deaf congregation, or something else to that effect. This is what some Jehovah's Witnesses offer as an excuse when they're confronted with Stephen's weird mannerisms. Slightly exaggerated facial expressions, Marek? Are we seeing the same video? This is a huge lie. No one in Stephen Lett's immediate family is deaf that we know of. His parents aren't deaf, and saying that he would need to adopt these terrible mannerisms for deaf people could only come out of hearing people who have never had any interactions with someone who is deaf. Over-enunciating, exaggerating lip movements and other actions like that are often done by a hearing person in the hopes that they can somehow convey their words better. In reality, that will only hinder communication with someone who is relying on the movement on your lips to follow along with what you have to say. Over-enunciating and exaggerating as Stephen does actually makes it harder for people to lip read, and they don't need any help to read body language, so you don't need to go for exaggerated movements there either. What's more, he isn't just some bumbling guy who has never left the religion and doesn't know how to interact in the real world. He's actually quite independently wealthy. Over 3 years ago, Phil from the Blue Envelopes channel dived into public records and traced back all of Stephen Lett's real estate purchases, comparing signatures to ensure he had the right guy, and quickly realizing that real estate is kind of the family business, and even found footage of Stephen Lett's brother, Tim. And yes, he eerily looks like Stephen.
It was here for a while. You know, I worked on it for 18 years, and about 2 years people got to enjoy it.
3,000-degree flames, stripping 18 years of work down in just a few hours.
I'm a pretty old guy, you know. Anybody need 2 acres of ground, you know, come see me. That's what I'm saying.
Phil discovered that Stephen had spent close to $1 million in real estate in less than half a decade, showing that Stephen is definitely wealthier than me and probably the wealthiest governing body member too. Do you think Stephen goes out welcoming people into the house he's buying or selling, being like,
Welcome, welcome, welcome. We extend a warm welcome to all of you. We're so happy to have you join us for this month's broadcast.
Of course not. This has to be either something he can turn off or a speech impediment. That is the first thing I thought as well, that he had some sort of speech impediment and that he's exaggerating his expressions to overcome some sort of lack of mobility. And this theory has some promise, as I asked a doctor friend of mine his thoughts, and he did identify several features on Stephen Lett that could mean he has facial palsy, probably as a consequence of a stroke. He pointed to his forehead and his mouth droop as telltale signs of facial palsy. And as you see, if you zoom into his mouth and examine the way he moves his lips, you'll realize facial palsy has nothing to do with Stephen Lett speaking like a Muppet. While people with any sort of facial paralysis might struggle to speak clearly or pronounce certain words, Stephen Lett overemphasizes everything he says, sometimes almost at random. Look at how he over-gesticulates and over-emotes in this video.
What a beautiful song. We need a childlike heart more than ever. In many parts of the world, it's customary to judge people on the basis of their race or age or by how much money they have.
In this video, he shows how he can definitely move his face without overdoing it. showing that he clearly has control over his own speech. And sometimes he forgets to put up the act. You can sometimes see the act slipping when he's being interviewed by someone else, especially before he started adopting this persona in public.
Never been sentimental toward material things. They were willing to move the headquarters from Pennsylvania to New York. They've been willing to sell buildings. They've been willing to buy buildings. See, they're always thinking, well, what's best for kingdom interest? There's a lot of work yet to be done. Our project is just now getting into full swing, but we're confident that the Dear Bethel family will be up to the task, that you will rise to the occasion, you will do what is necessary to get this work done.
As we saw, Stephen Lett is more than capable of speaking normally. This is an act he puts up whenever he's on camera to look more, well...
We're so happy to have you join us.
I honestly didn't know what he was going for with this persona when I started this video, but we know that Stephen is capable of speaking in a normal tone that doesn't sound like he's being condescending towards 3-year-olds. And the people who work with him know this. I found it very enlightening when I heard that this ex-Bethelite who had worked filming JW Broadcasting and worked with Stephen Lett had to say about him.
He is that way. I mean, he just walks around very much like a Gary Bro, kind of gregarious and pointing fingers at people, and not necessarily in the theatrical way, but is very bombastic. And it's close to that. I think that he's just always in the role. I think that he's lost himself in that role.
Because that's who Stephen Lett is. Nothing but a performance. If you're a Jehovah's Witness or have been one, you may have noticed that all Jehovah's Witnesses kinda talk the same way when they're on the platform. Whether it's Robert Lucioni, Ralph Waltz, Stephen Lett, or your elder at your local congregation, they'll speak with a unique rhythm, sort of like this. They can emphasize some stuff by going faster and making a pause, and then they can softly bring you back to base with a simple sentence. I've been wanting to make a video about this unique way of speaking, but I have to admit I don't fully understand how this happens or why this happens yet. I just know that through social conditioning, most Jehovah's Witnesses who end up progressing in the organization also end up giving their speeches with the same almost hypnotic cadence that makes it so easy to only passively listen to them while your mind drifts into whatever it wants to drift to. I think there's a connection between this way of speaking being hard to follow for long periods of time and indoctrination, because your brain gets tired of analyzing every single argument when it's presented like this, so instead of analyzing them critically, it's just easier to absorb the information and just accept that as truth without further analysis. And that's where we can find why Stephen Lett speaks so weirdly. Stephen Lett speaks like every other Jehovah's Witness, with the same boring, hypnotic cadence, but in a maximalist way. He over-exaggerates every part of this rhythm, going way too slow where he needs to go slow, and then too fast where he needs to go fast. He took the Jehovah's Witness way of speaking and over-exaggerated every part of it, even exaggerated hand gestures, movements, and of course, facial expressions. And that's what you're seeing when you see Stephen Lett consistently acting silly on camera. It's not him battling a disease. He's not trying to appeal to deaf people. He's just using the maximalist version of the Jehovah's Witness speech, perpetuating the social pressures of the religion to just conform and imitate others, even down to the cadence they need to use while they talk. And you see that in the answers the Jehovah's Witnesses give about Stephen Lett when they're asked about him. Remember those Quora answers from the beginning? The toxic positivity of Jehovah's Witnesses washes over Stephen Lett's condescending and exaggerated way of speaking. I read hundreds of comments replying why Stephen Lett talks like this, and they all either gave false information like him working for a deaf congregation or having a deaf family member, I assume to excuse him, or just completely ignored the question and instead just talked about how they admire Stephen Lett and how loving he seems to be. Basically, they just reply with how much they are supposed to like him. Stephen Lett is the most ridiculous looking cult leader I have ever seen. No one in the real world would take him seriously if he spoke like that. But when you're the head of a high control group that is conditioned to believe that God picked you to interpret the Bible for him. 7 million people will have no choice but to not only listen to you, but actively defend you, even if you speak like a Muppet. Think of the amount of money that if it fell out of your pocket, you wouldn't miss. That's the perfect amount to support me on Patreon and help me keep making at least one video per week. Get access to videos early, polls, and more by supporting me with any amount on Patreon.